Rapa Nui, Anuta, both islands, not the same. You know Easter Island, these guys, they're called Moai. They made them like crazy, cut down all the trees, killed all the birds, and their society collapsed. Or maybe it was rats, or Europeans, and diseases, and slavery. Yeah, probably that. Easter Island is actually named Rapa Nui, and it has the unfortunate distinction as poster child for the J-curve. If a population grows unimpeded, it can explode exponentially until one day it collapses, making a J-curve. Today, they've recovered. They're bringing Rapa Nui back, installing solar photovoltaic for electricity and fresh water, the most remote solar plants in the world, and building an 850 square meter school out of tires, bottles, cans, and what would normally be called garbage. It produces all of its own energy and collects water when it rains. Says the mayor, it's time to take care of our water. But challenges remain, such as worsening drought and erosion, high levels of imports, as well as being invaded by plastic waste from a nearby swirl zone called the South Pacific Gyre. An estimated 19,000 tons of non-organic garbage, mostly plastic, floats nearby. Rapa Nui is a little over 63 square miles with a population of 7,750, giving it a density of 122 people per square mile. Anuta is 300 people on a tiny 0.14 square mile island. Its population density is 2,100 people per square mile, higher than Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Taiwan. It is a rare and shining example of human conservation and natural harmony. They have canoes more than 150 years old still in use that are older than similar ones preserved in museums. You want convenience? Anuta has a fish trap right on the ocean. They just drive the fish in and spear them. Sustenance literally falls from the sky. Fresh produce is a hike up the hill to the gardens. The days are warm and filled with the sound of the ocean nearby. Anuta teaches us that it's possible to live in harmony with nature because it's already been done. But how this translates to the modern world is up to us. Advanced sustainability goals across organizations. Hello and welcome. Glad to have you here. For this first section, I thought I'd just start with what we need, just the basics, and we'll look at different goals from a top-level view concerning climate change and sustainability in general. From the United Nations to Mike Reynolds, the man who designed and built the sustainable school on Rapa Nui I mentioned earlier. I'm going to cover more than 15 different groups briefly, and at the end we'll have an eagle-eyed view of really the last 10 years of this global crisis and where we all find ourselves now. Okay, so this might be familiar to you. This is the hierarchy of needs proposed by Abraham Maslow's 1943 paper, A Theory of Human Motivation. On the bottom, we have physiological needs, what your body needs to run, keep the blood flowing, and staying alive. I did notice physiological is not spelled correctly. This is from Wikipedia. I thought about getting a different pick, but then I thought it's actually kind of perfect. Spelling physiological right is not a physiological need. It's not a safety need or belongingness and love need. You don't get to this level until esteem. So I just went with it, but I still noticed it, and yes, it still bothers me. Some versions also expand the higher level needs and add transcendence at the top, but it's really just a list of things we all need to live a good life, in my opinion. Animals included, and even plants, believe it or not. And I'll just come out and tell you I'm personally responsible for the death of multiple plants. But for the purposes of this exercise, I'm only going to focus on basic needs, the two bottom levels shown here. This one spells physiological right, but whoops, it uses safety to describe a safety need. Now that's technically true. Safety is an important part of safety, but I think they meant to put shelter or something like that. That's okay, I think we get the point. Another thing I've realized, especially at this time, is too few of these outlines give medical needs the importance it deserves, including my own, which you'll see here. I've come to describe basic needs as the 4 S's, or SX4, S times 4, or whatever works. They are safety, shelter, sustenance, and sustainability. And then below here you see I've kind of expanded what I mean by safety, in this case community and human resources, acknowledging that we are safer together working towards the other goals on the list, and especially when we are all in agreement. And then the other two are self-explanatory, but entire topics for their own time as well. And the last one, sustainability. Okay, so I've taken the sustainability and I've made an acronym out of it, and you can see that here: sustainable energy, water, air, and waste, or CWA. And I think it's pretty obvious why water, air, and waste would make it on the list, but is electricity a necessity? Human history tells us it isn't, but I would argue it is irreplaceable based on communication alone. And depending on where you are in the world, it has become a necessity for other reasons, but examples like Anuta show us it still doesn't have to be. For the purposes of this video, however, I'm going to follow the path of Rapa Nui and join the rest of humanity in the 21st century. So now that I've covered the basics, let's look at the top level goal that will be the driver for most of the other organizations on this list. And I'm beginning with the UN and the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, established in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations. So the main goal, you can see here, they've released a special report, and they state that we need to limit global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which relates to greenhouse gas emissions. And so this is their website here, and you can see there's plenty of information available for download. This is the summary for policymakers. Understanding the impacts of 1.5 degrees C global warming. So I'm not going to go into all of these, but I just wanted to kind of show you what was all available. Something else that I thought was kind of interesting, this is a conference of parties from so this is the COP21, and I just wanted to show you the agenda that they released. I thought it was kind of funny. I highlighted it here. So, proposed organization of the session overview. The president of the Conference of the Parties at its 20th session will open COP21 and propose the election of the president of COP21, who will also serve as the president of the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol at its 11th session. So yeah, then they go on and it gets even worse. So this is the events list for COP25 on the United Nations website. And so these are the links for all the different things that are going to be going on. I just wanted to read the first one. I just thought it was kind of funny. The conference includes the 25th session of the Conference of the Parties, the 15th session of the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol, and the second session of the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. It also includes the 51st sessions of the Subsidiary Body for Scientific and Technological Advice and the Subsidiary Body for Implementation. Yeah, so that's a mouthful. And so that is what the United Nations is up to. No, I'm just kidding. So the reason the 1.5 degrees Celsius is a big goal because it, like I said, it is the driver for most of the other organizations that I'm going to be covering, including this one. The European Commission releases a policy report on fossil CO2 emissions of all world countries. This is from 2018, as you can see. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this right now. This is actually the subject for the part 2 video, where I'm going to be covering emissions budgets and calculating greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, I'm going to save all that for the second video. But I did want to highlight this here. 184 countries have now ratified the Paris Agreement, recognizing that tackling climate change will require a truly global effort. All parties currently need to implement the nationally determined contributions that they pledged ahead of the Paris Conference in 2015. 3 years have gone by since then, and the world is anxiously expecting global greenhouse gas emissions to peak as soon as possible and then to steeply decline. In order to stand a realistic chance to keep global mean temperature to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, the IPCC, in its recent report, is very clear. Global carbon emissions must reach net zero by 2050. And so that is that expands the goal of 1.5 degrees a little more. Net zero by 2050 is the overarching or the end goal. That's where we want to be headed. So let's continue with the UN. Okay, so let me stop here. Okay, so next after the UN is going to be the Obama White House, and after that I'm going to touch on 350.org, and then at the US state level. So that's where we're headed. So this is the Sustainable Development Goals. This is also on UN.org, and they list 17 goals that are all interconnected, and they have set individual goals for each of them to achieve by 2030. So you can see what they all include here. Goal 1, eradicate poverty. Goal 2, eradicate hunger. Goal 3, health and well-being, which includes vaccination. Goal 4, quality education. Goal 5, gender equality. Goal 6, water and sanitation. 7, affordable and clean energy. 8, decent work and economic growth. Goal 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. Goal 10, reduced inequalities. So yeah, as they said, these are kind of interconnected. 11, sustainable cities and communities. 12, responsible consumption and production. 13, climate action. 14, so life below water, that is, keeping the oceans clean. Goal 15, that's biodiversity, life on land. Goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. So this is human rights, as it says. And goal 17, so this is community action with government and private funding, most likely. So there you have it. That's the 17, and obviously, this is the UN, so like I said, it's going to be very top level goals. And as we move through this list, we're going to be kind of going from the top level all the way to the bottom level. Continuing with the UN, and then we'll move on They also have The Lazy Person's Guide to Saving the World. And I'm not going to spend much time on this, but level 1, things you can do from your couch. Level 2, things you can do at home. Level 3, things you can do outside your house. Level 4, things you can do at work. And they say level 4, exceptional employee. Okay, moving on to the Obama White House. So this is pre-2016. This is actually released June 2013. This is on energy.gov website. And he, well, not him, not only Obama, this was just the Obama White House from the Obama administrations. All right, so the executive branch of the federal government at that time. All right, so they outlined 3 goals. Well, 3 overarching goals, and then we'll expand those on the next couple pages. So first, cut carbon pollution in America. Second, prepare the United States for the impacts of climate change. And 3, lead international efforts to combat global climate change and prepare for its impacts. And they released a fact sheet. At the same time, we have a moral obligation to leave our children a planet that's not polluted or damaged, and by taking an all of the above approach to develop homegrown energy and stay. Yeah, so right there they're saying all above approach. That's why natural gas expanded quite a bit during this time, and domestic production also expanded. But he does outline, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because this was the previous administration, so and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but this is just expanding those 3 overarching goals that I mentioned earlier. And this is on the archived White House pages, and all of these links, by the way, will be listed in order that I'm going through them on the description. So this is the actual climate action plan. And again, I'm not going to go through it in much detail, but I do kind of want to just look at the table of contents a little bit. That gives you kind of a high level view. So, you can see kind of all the things that, and most of this done by executive order, by the way. But increasing fuel economy standards as part of cut carbon pollution. And yeah, so you'll see the 3 headlines are the 3 main goals, and then protecting our economy from natural resources, resilience in the health sector, reducing wildfire risks, and that's part of the second one, prepare the United States for the impacts. And it just goes on and on. But I'm going to go ahead and move on, and this is going to be from the Department of Homeland Security. This is another climate action plan coming out of the under the Obama administration. And again, I won't spend a whole lot of time here, but I did want to read this highlighted part. And this is the opening of the report, by the way, from the Department of Homeland Security in 2014. According to the recent release of the 3rd National Climate Assessment, parts of the United States will experience an increase in frequency and intensity of hurricanes, massive flooding, excessively high temperatures, wildfires, severe downpours, severe droughts, storm surge, and sea level rise throughout the 21st century. Other efforts, including the 2014 Quadrennial Homeland Security Review, describe an increasing risk from natural events and conclude that climate change is amongst the top homeland security risks. So there you have it from the Department of Homeland Security. And then I'm going to move right along to the Department of Defense in October of the same year, 2014. And we have a 2014 climate change adaptation roadmap available publicly. Well, let's take a look at that. Department of Defense 2014 Climate Change Adaptation Roadmap. The responsibility of the Department of Defense is the security of our country. That requires thinking ahead and planning for a wide range of contingencies. Among the future trends that will impact our national security is climate change, rising global temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, climbing sea levels, and more extreme weather events will intensify the challenges of global instability, hunger, poverty, and conflict. They will likely lead to food and water shortages, pandemic diseases, disputes over refugees and resources, and destruction by natural disasters in regions across the globe. In our defense strategy, we refer to climate change as a threat multiplier because it has the potential to exacerbate many of the challenges we are dealing with today, from infectious disease to terrorism. And with that, I'm going to move on to 350.org. And next up is the U.S. state level. So 350.org is a political activist group organized in 2009. This is their about page, or actually this is their 10-year anniversary page on 350.org, as the name implies. Started in 2009. Climate crisis is the most important issue facing humanity. Founded by a group of university students in the United States with author Bill McKibben, who wrote one of the first books on global warming for the general public. Yeah, and if you are involved in climate change activism, you will know the name Bill McKibben. Involved in the first global day of action ahead of COP15 in 2009. And I'm not going to go through this entire timeline, but you'll see that it's available on here. Celebrated the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. Like I said, mainly political activism. But yeah, what I did want to highlight on the 350.org is that there is actually science behind the number 350, and it refers to the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And so the goal here is to get below 350 parts per million CO2. We are currently, actually this is outdated, we are currently above 410, maybe even higher at this point. And that's 350.org. So now moving on to the state level. This is Center for Climate and Energy Solutions at c2es.org. Next is the city level. And then following that is the Trump White House. So for here, I just... Let's see. Oh, it's having some problems. Let me reload the page real quick. So yeah, like I said, this is the U.S. state level climate action plans, and it has this interactive map here that's pretty handy. You can just click on the states that are in purple, and it will pop up a quick little condensed version of the climate action plan and the goals. So for Iowa, released in 2008, beginning, or I would say hopefully the original version was released in 2008. reduce emissions 50% from 2005 levels by 50 and 90% baseline by 2050. Okay. But needless to say, Iowa has actually expanded wind energy quite a bit. Let's look at Florida. Released in 2008, reduced emissions 80% from 1990. So yeah, I mean, you're not going to get any updates like right here. You'd have to dig a little bit deeper to get to that point. Let's look at, what was the one I wanted to look at? Kentucky, yeah. Released in 2011. So you might not expect that. Reduction of 20% below 1990 levels by 2030. And then it doesn't go into much more detail beyond that. So yeah, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the state level. What I really wanted to get to was the city level. So this is c40.org, and I actually did not know about this until I started doing this research. But this group includes 96 affiliated cities, which encompasses 25% of global GDP, or 1 in 12 people worldwide. And this is the cities page on their website, and you can see you can even go by city and get a detailed view of each one. So I'm just going to bring up Singapore real quick, because that's I'm actually going to profile Singapore in the next video. But not really a whole lot of information or details about each city, but I just wanted to show you that. So history of the C40, and I'm going to get to their goals here very quickly. So formed in 2005 in London, and where did I wanted to, I know it references the 1.5 degrees somewhere here. Yeah, Mayor Bloomberg was actually C40 chair in 2010. Maybe it's on the next page. So this is the programs page on their website, and some of their programs, like I am going to look at reinventing cities a little bit closer in a minute. But again, this is based off the 1.5 degrees Celsius from the IPCC. There it is. That's what I was looking for. But to zoom in a little bit further, even, we have to go to the city level. And so this is Houston, Texas. HoustonTexas.gov. So I'm going to pull up their climate action plan, but you can see here, to comply with the Paris Agreement, the plan will follow science-based criteria that will cap the temperature increase associated with climate change to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So again, referencing the IPCC. But let's look at the climate action plan. And Houston is one of the largest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the country, with 14.9 metric tons of CO2 per capita per year. A baseline of greenhouse gas emissions inventory was developed using 2014 data to guide the climate action plan strategies and track the implementation progress. In 2014, Houston residents and businesses generated nearly 35 million tons of greenhouse gases. So this is the city level effort. To track emissions and then come up with a plan to reduce them. So still on the city level, this is the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Yet another organization at the city level, but I did like their website because they have their goals right out here on the front, as you can see, and some helpful stats. So more than 50% of the world's population live in cities, which accounts for 70% of global CO2 emissions, and consume 66% of the world's energy. So that's the motivation behind it. Based on 2019 commitments, they could collectively reduce 24 billion tons of CO2 by 2030 and 90 billion tons by 2050. So again, this is the city level. And then at the individual program level, this is still within the c40cities.org. This program is called Reinventing Cities. So, Reinventing Cities is a global competition organized by C40 to drive carbon neutral and resilient urban regeneration around the world. It is a competition between 15 cities and 40 different sites for redevelopment and reuse. And the next program on the city level, and this is still C40 cities, is Deadline 2020. And this is an outline of the path to 1.5 degrees. And I'm just going to kind of scroll through all these, until I get down to this. And I thought this was a really helpful kind of timeline here. And I'm not going to read every single one, but it just basically starts out with establishing the 1.5 degree C. Kind of repeats some of the things I talked about earlier. But I would encourage you to look this over. Each one of these is important. The one I really wanted to highlight was right here, and then this gives a good breakdown of the global CO2 budget. So total global budget for 1.5 degrees C that we have left is 387 gigatons of CO2 emissions. Currently we are at 47 gigatons a year. C40 cities accounts for 2.4 gigatons of that total number. So I just thought that would be, and then it goes on, and I just thought, and it's just outlining the path to net zero by 2050. So I thought I'd share that also. Moving on, we're still at the city level. A bit of good news. So this report here shows that 27 C40 cities have peaked their greenhouse gas emissions, beginning with, as you will see here, what one did they use as an example? San Francisco. So peaked back here in 2000. Copenhagen in 91. So yeah, I just thought a bit of good news I'd share. And that report is also available on c40.org or in the description below. This is another C40 website, Greenhouse Gas Emissions Interactive Dashboard, and I just thought it was kind of cool. It has, you can bring up all the different emissions data, and my session has timed out apparently. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that real quick, and this will all be, oh, it can't be found. Well, anyway. So I just wanted to show you that real quick, and again, that link is down below. So now we're moving on to the Trump White House, and after this we will cover the U.S. Global Change Research Program, and then we will circle back to the Global Covenant of Mayors at the city level, and following that is the Green New Deal. So this is from Brookings.edu. I just searched current U.S. climate policy. It wasn't hard to find, but I think the first two paragraphs sum it up pretty nicely. To think about federal climate policy these days is to think about the future. Will we see Democrats embrace a radical program like the Green New Deal, or will elites of both parties come to see a carbon tax as an attractive means of raising revenue? And that is basically, as far as the establishment goes, seems like all that they're kind of willing to even entertain. But currently, we're not even at that point. Focusing on 2021 and beyond is quite reasonable. The Trump administration has clearly opposed the climate policies of its predecessor, and there is no reason to expect legislative action of any kind during the 116th Congress. It would seem there is not much to know about American climate policy in the presence, and that is very much the case. That's all I really need to do to cover the Trump White House as far as climate policy goals. But this, from the Department of Defense, this is on globalchange.gov, as you'll see here, and this also kind of covers or encompasses a lot of other agencies and organizations in the United States. I just wanted to read the first paragraph here. The Department of Defense, while not supporting a formal mission dedicated to global change research, is developing policies and plans to manage and respond to the effects of climate change on Department of Defense missions, assets, and operational environment. So this is currently on a government website. It has links here to some other groups. It references actions to adapt to climate change, and I wanted to highlight a couple reports that are listed on here. First, the overview, fourth National Climate Assessment, Volume 2, Impacts, Risks, and Adaptation in the United States from 2018. Yeah, let's take a look at that. Introduction. Earth's climate is now changing faster than at any point in the history of modern civilization, primarily as a result of human activities. And this is kind of an interesting report. So it lists impacts and actions across the United States. And this is 2018. They also released an executive summary. And I had to scroll down pretty far to find what I was looking for on this one, but I did eventually find it. And I highlighted it. There it is. Limiting globally average warming to 2 degrees Celsius will require major reductions in emissions. Human activities are now the dominant cause of the observed trends in climate. For that reason, future climate projections are based on scenarios of how human activities will continue to affect the climate over the remainder of this century and beyond. There remains significant uncertainty about future emissions due to changing economic, political, and demographic factors. So they're saying basically that limiting warming to even to 2 degrees Celsius is going to be very hard. And they go on here to explain the reasoning behind all that, positive feedbacks. And I'm not going to read all of this. This report is out there. The link will be available below. this is okay. So here's another one I wanted to read. Achieving global greenhouse gas emissions reductions before 2030, consistent with targets and actions announced by governments in the lead up to the 2015 Paris Climate Conference, would hold open the possibility of meeting the long-term temperature goal of limiting global warming to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So, I mean, they're basically saying the goal now is 2 degrees, even though 1.5 is still what's listed for the majority of like publications in the press. That was kind of the point of that. So let's move on to the Green New Deal. And following this is Sunrise, Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, and the Center for Climate and Security. So, here we are on congress.gov. And this is the Green New Deal, or otherwise known as the House Resolution 109, introduced in the House on February 7th, 2019, in the first session of the 116th Congress. And I've highlighted here what I want to cover right here, and then I'll get into the specific goals. Global temperatures must be kept below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels to avoid the most severe impacts of a changing climate, which will require global reductions in greenhouse emissions from human sources of 40 to 60% from 2010 levels by 2030, and net zero global emissions by 2050. Whereas, because the United States has historically been responsible for a disproportionate amount of greenhouse gas emissions, having emitted 20% of the global greenhouse gas emissions through 2014, and has a high technological capacity, the United States must take a leading role in reducing emissions through economic transformation. So there is the reasoning behind the Green New Deal. And then here on newconsensus.com/Green New Deal, it gives a good summary of the vision and goals, as you can see here. So achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions, create millions of good high-wage jobs, invest in infrastructure, clean air and water, climate and community resilience, healthy food, access to nature, sustainable environment for all, promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing the historic oppression of frontline and vulnerable communities. National mobilization, and then here is individual projects, financing, and further reasoning. So that is the Green New Deal. I'm not going to go into too much more detail about that, and I'm going to move on to the new and emerging political activist groups, starting with Sunrise. So yeah, mainly political activism, supporting candidates. They have a list of candidates here, active around the country, mainly in the U.S. On their About page, moving down here, what am I looking for? Our strategy, stage 1, launched in 2017, looking to win governing power by bringing it home through the 2020 general election, and engage in mass non-cooperation to interrupt business as usual and win a Green New Deal. People power, political power, and working with other movements and groups. So you can see the Green New Deal is kind of the guiding policy. That brings us to Fridays for Future, and I'm sure you recognize Greta, and this is her organization, and they are mainly a political activist group. And I also had to do quite a bit of scrolling to find the list of guidelines and the goals, general goals. But it is at the bottom of the homepage. So why are kids striking? School children are required to attend school, but with the worsening climate destruction, this goal of going to school begins to be pointless. Why study for a future which may not be there? Why spend a lot of effort to become educated when our governments are not listening to the educated? And then if you go on over to it's a valid question. And then I'm going to click on the About page here. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here either. But started in August of 2018 after 15-year-old Greta Thunberg sat in front of the Swedish parliament every school day for 3 weeks to protest against the lack of action on climate change. So that is Fridays for Future. And she's gone on since then, as I'm sure you know, to speak at the climate conventions and Davos and all that stuff. Now we move on to Extinction Rebellion. Born in the UK and quickly spread across the world. Landed stateside, so they are now active in the United States. They declare nonviolent rebellion against the U.S. government for its criminal inaction on the ecological crisis. It began a shared set of principles for the growth health action results. They demand that the government must tell the truth about climate change. The government must enact legally binding policies to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2025. So even a more ambitious goal. Essentially impossible, but I guess that's how you negotiate, right? You start from the extreme position. I'm sure that's the reasoning. Goal 3, we do not trust our government. So they are calling for citizens' assembly to oversee the changes as we arise from the wreckage, creating a democracy fit for purpose. 4, demand a just transition that prioritizes the most vulnerable people and indigenous sovereignty. So they essentially support the Green New Deal, but they are even taking it a step further. Can further summarize their goals as tell the truth, act now, moving beyond politics. Oh boy. So now, moving on to the Center for Climate and Security. Now, a lot of people probably don't even know about this organization, so I wanted to go over their About page as well. They are a nonpartisan institute of the Council on Strategic Risk. They are a team of security and military experts. And this particular group envisions a climate-resilient world which recognizes that climate change threats to security are already significant and unprecedented and acts to address those threats in a manner that is commensurate to their scale, consequence, and probability. And they outline their program areas here: policy, analysis, research, and resource hub, and resource hub. Something also really helpful that's on their website. They have this page, they have a couple pages with all of these links of the history of government research on climate change. And I'm going to focus on the defense here. But this goes back, I mean, starting, so they have the latest ones here on top, but this goes all the way back. Every year, all these reports, beginning in 1990, U.S. Navy War College Global Climate Change Implications for the United States. And then there are at least one report every year from 2003 onward. So you can kind of get, and this is just defense. So this is, kind of get a sense of the history of all the reports. A lot of talking going on. Moving on, I did want to highlight a couple of the reports coming out of this group. This one, the responsibility to prepare and prevent a climate security governance framework for the 21st century, released October 2019. They identify 3 main gaps in our response and 3 main principles, I'm guessing guiding principles. But I'm not going to go into too much detail beyond that. You can see the report here in the links. It's available on this page. The report I did want to bring up or go or read from is their newest one. So the Center for Climate and Security has long noted that we have a responsibility to prepare for and prevent the security implications of climate change, including the intersection of climate change and health security as addressed in our own Security Threat Assessment of Global Climate Change published in February of this year. Isn't that interesting? This is the most recent report on this list. And I just wanted to read from the key recommendations from that report, released in February. 1. Mitigating these risks require quickly reducing and phasing out global greenhouse gas emissions. Achieve net zero global emissions as soon as possible in a manner that is ambitious, safe, and equitable. Climate-proof environments, infrastructure, and institutions. And renewed efforts to prioritize, communicate, and respond to climate security threats. So, and they did mention, this was just released March 18th, so a couple weeks ago, reminding the intelligence community warned of an upcoming pandemic. Okay, so next is the U.S. Health and Human Services, then China, the EU, Bill Gates, and finally Mike Reynolds. So here we are on the Health and Human Services.gov, their sustainability page, and you can see here they ask right at the top, what does sustainability mean? They say that it means living in such a way now that does not sacrifice the well-being of future generations, that is, to meet the needs in the present within the Earth's closed systems while restoring, protecting, and maintaining the natural systems, services, and resources that make life possible, including clean air, clean water, and clean soil. Sustainability goes hand in hand with the HHS mission to protect the health of all Americans. So, yeah, they're basically saying the world is an island. And that's the name, hence the name of the series. This sustainability reports and progress data. So yeah, HHS outlines its path towards sustainable operations and efficiency in the 2019 sustainability report. So let's look at the 2019 sustainability report. What does it say? So did I highlight anything on this one or did I not? Okay, I didn't on this Oh yeah, I remember this one. Okay. So, unfortunately, this one, well, it just wasn't what I thought it was going into it. They are basically setting goals and tracking progress about government facilities and buildings, which includes, mainly efficiency, but also renewable energy. In fact, if I go back to the table of contents, you can get kind of a high level view. Water efficiency, sustainable buildings, waste management, all the things that I've outlined uh, earlier. So this does give you a good look at kind of the lower level or base level goals. And under the HHS, they created the Office of Federal Sustainability. And this is on sustainability.gov. So they outline that the federal government manages 350,000 buildings and 600,000 vehicles. So they're just kind of giving you an idea of the size of the operation and why it's a focus. Established in 1993, and then of course their main goals are outlined in that report. Moving on to China, and this is on Bloomberg.gov, and I like this little data ribbon over here. It kind of shows you all the overall, or some high level numbers for the world. Anyway, moving on. So China produces more CO2 than the US and Europe combined. And then it kind of outlines some of the goals. So again, the driver for this is the 1.5 degrees C goal from the UN. Goal of reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 18%. Outlook good. Goal reduce coal's share of energy use by 58%. On track with an asterisk. Natural gas boost the share of natural gas to 8.3 to 10. Barely going to get there. Boost the share of non-fossil fuel energy consumption to 15%, almost there. Air quality, right direction, a long way to go. But what I wanted to focus on here was up closer to the top. Right here. So China currently emits the most greenhouse gas emissions, and there's not yet a sign of reaching the peak. The rate of growth, not reaching the peak. The planet's best hope is that China manages to match its dramatic rise in emissions with an equally rapid reining it in. While it took the US and UK more than a century from the start of industrialization to reach peak emissions, China is aiming to do it decades faster. And the other important thing to note is that China's population is way bigger than the US and definitely the UK. So their emissions per capita is lower than the US and the UK. So that's just an important thing to note. And if their emissions per capita were ever to match the US, I mean, you can kiss the 1.5 degree goal goodbye, and the 2 degree as well, for sure. So this is from Climate Home News. UN very confident China plans to raise climate ambition released November 9th, 2019, and they kind of talk about the goals that are going to be talked about in the upcoming COP26, which is where is it? As you can see, yeah, COP26 climate talks postponed due to coronavirus pandemic. The statement added that the EU Commission was actively preparing to communicate by early 2020 a long-term strategy with the objective of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. And as it happens, next we're looking at the EU climate strategy. With the end goal of climate neutral by 2050, they have released the European Green Deal in line with EU's commitment to global climate action under the Paris Climate Agreement. National strategies, EU strategy, Commission's vision, all that available here, and I am on their policy and strategies page, and again the link is below. So let's take a little closer look at the European Green Deal. The actions outlined here are to boost the efficient use of resources, moving to clean, circular economy, restore biodiversity, cut pollution, invest in environmentally friendly technologies, support industry to innovate, rolling out cleaner, cheaper, and healthier forms of transport, decarbonizing energy sector, and so on. I kind of like the timeline here ends April 2020. And then you can also see some of the policy areas. So clean energy, sustainable energy, and this gives you kind of a little more detailed look at the individual goals. Biodiversity, farm to fork, eliminating pollution, and of course climate neutral by 2050. With that, we'll move on to Bill Gates, and then the last will be Mike Reynolds and the Earth Ship. So this is an interview in the Intelligencer, that's how you say that, on September 17th, 2019. Headline, I don't see anything worthy of the word plan to fight climate change. On the 17th, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation released its annual Goalkeepers Report, and we're going to take a look at that as well in a minute. A daddy-heavy status update measuring global progress toward the UN Sustainability Development Goals, which, if you'll remember, we're now full circle from the UN goals at the beginning. This year's edition focuses on inequality, and that's relating to gender and geography. And then I highlighted a quote here that I wanted to read. So part of the question is, do you credit a goal of 2 degrees? So yeah, again, behind the curtains there, they have basically dropped the 1.5. The focus is essentially 2 degrees now. Do you think even that is overly optimistic? How do you define success in the climate story? His answer is, in part, there are no magic numbers. The smaller the temperature increase, the better. People who say that this number is associated with it's all over don't even try. That's not true. But if the number gets up to 3, 4, the amount of sea level rise you lock in, the amount of ecosystem loss that you lock in, it gets to be super, super high, so you just don't want to run the experiment. Yeah, I agree with that. So if we could stop at 2 degrees. It'd be great if we could stop at 2 degrees, unless there are huge surprises on scientific advances. I just don't see it happening, so that's not a very encouraging answer. But let's take a look real quick at how Bill Gates aims to clean up the planet. This is a report released on February 4th, 2018. So this was before that interview, correct? Yes. So yikes, it looks like his optimism has gone down since then, so that may not be a good sign. But what I wanted to highlight here, this is the machine that strips CO2 from the air and could potentially produce carbon neutral fuel on a mass scale. It could also make Harvard superstar physicists David Keith, Bill Gates, and a oil sands magnate a lot of money. The idea is grandiose yet simple. Decarbonize the global economy by extracting global warming carbon dioxide straight from the air using fans and chemical wizardry to make a gas carbon neutral that will drive the world's ships, planes, and trucks. So that's the idea, and it's possible that it's workable, but it's just not known if it's going to be able to do it on scale, at the scale that it's needed. Moving on from there, I want to end the part on Bill Gates with the goalkeepers report that he released, and just because I thought it was kind of cool the way they did it. So this was from 2019, and yeah, again, it's about equality, and it's kind of cool the way they showed how they start out ahead. So this is them, and you can see it's just kind of a flat paved path, based on all these things that they had to face. Of course, you can see the little hill for gender, not there for Bill, but this is a person in the third world. So I thought that was kind of a cool illustration there. And then this is also kind of helpful. So they began in this narrow band to take a closer look at the layers of inequality. So it starts in this area here in Africa. And as you scroll down, it zooms in to a single country, and then a drought-prone region of that country, to a single group in that region. And within this community, there is a girl who is trapped by social norms dictating that her role in life is to serve her husband and bear him children. Each time we zoom, we see yet another layer of disadvantage. These disadvantages don't need to pile up on top of one another to make life hard, but when they do, as for the marginalized child in Chad, the effect is brutal. So I thought that was just kind of cool, little illustration there, and then they have all this information as well, and it just goes on and on. And this is on the gatesfoundation.org, the Goalkeepers 2019 report. Moving on finally to the last part. This is Mike Reynolds, and he outlines the 6 human needs for a harmonious life on Earth. They are food, energy, clean water, shelter, garbage management, and sewage treatment. And he tackles these on the individual level with his Earthship. And this is essentially a home a type of house built with natural and recycled materials with energy conservation in mind, designed to produce water, electricity, and food for its own use. And it just kind of outlines the key advantages, the main materials, tires, dirt, bottles, cans. They install solar and wind. They use thermal mass and passive heating for climate control. Also food production with the greenhouse on the south-facing side, water harvesting in cisterns, and that's also part of water recirculation system and part of the thermal mass as well. Then he just kind of outlines all the advantages a little bit further with more details. So yeah, they have crews, schools, and you can even stay at one. Whew. That brings us to the end of this video. That's all I have for the moment anyway. There are still plenty of others to look at, like the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, Union of Concerned Scientists, World Health Organization, International Monetary Fund, and on and on. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for Iceland and Singapore in part 2. Bye now.